welcome to Forum. I'm Andrew Gilligan, and this is the topical debate show where the people ask the questions. Today, with the Lisbon Treaty just ratified, our topic is Europe. Supporters of the treaty say it's only about streamlining the EU institutions and making them work better. To opponents, it's part of a federalist agenda. Another milestone to a Euro state. There'll be a new unelected president of the European Council, a job Tony Blair might get. More powers for both the Commission and the Parliament, and an end to the national veto in several key areas. And what neither side disputes is that Lisbon is essentially the same thing as the European Constitution, so roundly rejected by the voters of France and the Netherlands in 2005. So, do the people of Europe actually want what's being done in their name, or is there opposition because they're misinformed, bamboozled by media scares about federalist superstates? Is the EU undermining the influence of Europe's nation-states, or in a world of big powers, is a more unified Europe the only way those nations can exercise any influence at all? To discuss all this, an excellent panel. To my right, Robert Evans, a former chairman of the European Parliamentary Labour Party. To his right, Peter Luff, chairman of the campaigning organisation The European Movement. To my left, Nigel Farage, MEP, leader of the UK Independence Party, and to his left, Christopher Booker, co-founder of Private Eye and a campaigning author against greater European integration. Welcome to you all. First of all, time for me to announce that if you'd like to be part of our studio audience here in London, you can call our hotline on 0208 728 6472 or email us at forum@presstv.co.uk. You should see those details at the bottom of your screen now. And now to the first question. It's from Anthony Rock. Your question.
Members of the panel, will the Lisbon Treaty benefit the EU, and how?
Peter Luff.
Well, I think it'll benefit it enormously. I mean, essentially it does a number of things. First of all, it creates a kind of entity for Europe much more strongly in the rest of the world. And that is what I think Europe needs. We've got a huge number of major problems. Climate being an obvious one, energy security, the whole issues of crime across borders. That's the first thing it begins to tackle. It begins to make more democracy in Europe. It actually increases the power of the European Parliament, which is crucial for actually making oversight on the Council of Ministers. It opens out the Council of Ministers. It makes it more transparent. I think there's a whole series of individual reforms to the European Union, which collectively I think is going to make it much more responsive to people in Europe. And therefore I welcome it. I think it's a great day both for Britain and for Europe today, and we should be celebrating. The
Peter,
big problem
I mean, you say
always...
it's making Europe more democratic, but I mean,
Yes.
on, I think, 4 of the 6 occasions on which it's been put to the people of Europe, either Lisbon or the constitution which preceded it was rejected.
Well, it isn't the constitutional treaty, that's the first thing. It is different, the constitutional treaty.
It's worded differently, but it
not.
says the same thing.
Well, it doesn't have a
96%
national
the same.
anthem, it doesn't have all the flim-flam of the constitution. Personally, I favoured the idea of a simple constitution that people could understand and vote on. Now, the point is, let's take the Irish referendum. The interesting thing about that is when they went back a second time, everyone said, oh, it's appalling, it's treating the people badly. But there was a bigger turnout, and the yes vote was really there, because there was proper information.
OK, but what about the French referendum? A 10% victory for the Eurosceptics on a turnout of nearly 70%.
Oh,
Huge
precisely.
defeat for the
But
constitution.
that was a precisely different treaty. What is more, and that's what worries me about referendums, they weren't really voting a lot of the time on the Lisbon Treaty. A lot of it was voting to kick the government. A lot of it was voting about should Europe be more liberal or should it be more socially conscious. A whole variety of other issues come in. That's one of the reasons I don't think referendums are the best way to deal with these issues.
OK, OK, yeah, come in on this, Nigel Farage.
Well, it's a wonderful answer from Peter that referendums aren't the way, because actually the way this European Union is being developed is without the people. So your question, will the Lisbon Treaty benefit the European Union? Well, it will benefit those that want a strong European Union, because what this treaty is about is giving the European Union power. That's the key word. Not a little tidying up exercise that Peter Hain told us it would be when he was Europe Minister. It's about power, it's about identity, it's about giving the Union for the first time what's called legal personality, which means that internationally it's a state in its own right. It gives it the ability to sign treaties. It's going to have a president whose powers are undefined, and it's going to have a foreign minister. I mean, I could go on. So for the European Union, for those that want a United States of Europe, the answer to your question is yes, the Lisbon Treaty is a good thing. But I would just like to add to that, I don't think it's a good thing for the peoples of Europe.
Why hasn't there been a
because they've not actually, in most cases, been consulted. And just look at the position in this country. We have a Labour Party and a Liberal Democrat Party elected to Parliament promising that they'll give us a referendum and not doing so. And we have a Conservative Party winning the European elections this year, saying vote for us, we'll give you a referendum, and now they've turned their backs on that promise as well. And I think for democracy, and I think for national democracy, and Peter can talk about more powers to the European Parliament, well, more powers of scrutiny for the European Parliament, but less power for national parliaments. So good for bureaucrats.
More power in the treaty for national
parliaments. less, and this is once again, typical sleight of hand. If a group of countries get together because they don't like a proposal, the European Commission will consider that request.
Okay.
Doesn't mean they have to, but a very bad thing for democracy and the peoples of Europe.
Well, let's get back to this point of yours about democracy. Hold on 1 second. If people are so concerned, why do only 1% of the British electorate give Europe as the issue they're most concerned about?
Well, that's actually not true,
because
what they talk about are the issues that come directly from membership of the European Union. Open border immigration is a very good example of that. You know, there is an overwhelming feeling in Britain.
That's not an issue. That was decided in Britain. The other EU
states
have not
decided
allowed.
In Britain.
Well, the other EU states have not allowed open immigration.
When we opened the doors, to the whole of Eastern Europe, we did so because they joined the European Union.
That was a decision by the UK government. The other European states
what
have
the
decided
UK
not
government
to open
did was allow it to happen more quickly. But the whole point about joining the EU is you have total free movement of peoples within it. We now have.
But we're not part of Schengen.
We now have asylum policy. We now have asylum policy, which used to be called refugee policy. That now is chiefly decided in the European Union. And with this treaty, more and more, Britain will not be deciding who can come to live, work, and settle in this country. So the impact of the EU on our lives is huge, and both sides of the panel would agree on that. If you're running a business, you know, whatever you're doing, the impact is huge. So people aren't terribly interested in treaties themselves, but they're interested in what's happened to our democracy. They're interested in the effects of it.
OK, Robert Evans.
Well, you say, Nigel, that the impact is huge. And yes, it is. It is pretty big. It is pretty big. But really, what we don't need in this country is the distortions that you've given there. And you've rattled off, and I tried to scribble down some of the things. And I've heard you say before, you said becoming a state. Well, you know full well, Nigel, you know full well that it's 27 member states. And you then spoke about a president of the European Council. No, I'm going to finish. You said it's getting its own president of the European Council. And unfortunately, this is a use of language and it's a misnomer. If we were just saying the European Union is going to get a chairman or a chair of the European Council full-time, people wouldn't be quite so worked up about it. It's because people like you, Nigel, and others from your side, and I'm afraid the press as well, have portrayed so often the president as a president of Europe rather like the president of France or the president of the United States.
And it is described as a president.
Let's get back to your first point. Article 47 of this treaty says the Union shall have legal personality. It has never had that before, and therefore, internationally, for the first time ever, this is a state.
But then,
not a series of. Hang on. Article 47 makes it clear that post-Lisbon, it is not sovereign states cooperating. It is a state in its own right, and it has the power. It has the power to sign treaties.
Hold on 1 second.
As a state in its own. The European Commission has been present at G8 meetings because it represents other countries, but it is not a state in the sense you're using. Can the EU
now sign treaties?
It
yes
is
or
not
no?
one. Pardon?
Can the EU, post-Lisbon, now sign treaties?
Certain treaties, not all treaties. Of course, certain treaties.
But the decisions
for those treaties are being made by the member governments.
Just tell them the truth. You want a United States of Europe.
All right, let me bring in Christopher Booker. Christopher Booker, your view on this.
The silent man at the end.
Come on.
Not for long. Yeah, the cleverest thing that the European project, if we can call it that, as it's called widely in Europe, this building up over 50 more plus years of a supranational government up there, with all the member states ever increasing in numbers, the cleverest thing they did was to constantly increase the powers of this new central entity, taking them away from the nation states and their parliaments and their democracies and their voters, but at the same time leaving all the member states' own institutions, monarchies, courts, parliaments, in place. This is